thank you very much for your time this afternoon. There's been, as I said already, probably publicly, there's been a huge response to the reaction from the shedders, and we're looking forward to a very engaging chat. As I said, we're a broad church of gardeners. We have the shed gardens do some fantastic things. I've seen strawberry plants grown from Wavin pipes and all sorts. But a lot of the sheds are closed, and people are starting at home and gardening at home. And we've specific questions around that. So thanks very much for joining us. How are you? How's it all going in your world?
Good. It's been a funny old year. First of all, I should introduce Paul, who's my colleague. This is Paul Smith. He's from Carlow. He's a brilliant plants man. He spent a good few years working across the water and came back to Ireland to join me a couple of years ago. And he's particularly good on the tricky questions, so that's why he's here.
Good.
It's been a funny old year. I've quite, you feel guilty saying it, but I've quite enjoyed this year because for the first time in 30 years, I've stayed at home and I've been able to work in my garden and indeed make a television show from the garden and do all sorts. So it's been very odd, but it's a time when everything has slowed right down, and it's a time that I've begun to question everything else I do and to see other possibilities. And I have found from the stress perspective that the garden has been a great refuge for me and for so many other people, but certainly for me included. So I've enjoyed that slowing down, and I've tried to make the most of it, of working from home and being at home. And I've been happy. I won't say the family have been happy, but I've been happy.
The fine line. So autumn, winter. Let's get into it. There's a lot to be done, and we're chatting to you today to encourage people to get out there. We had a quick talk with Luke O'Neill. I think the benefits of gardening, you will stand over 100% from a mental, physical, from all sorts of health reasons. And there's a lot to be done. It's not a case of it shuts down, does it? It continues from now on.
No, there's a huge amount to be done. It's funny, in these islands we have this temperate climate. So temperate climate means the lack of extremes. It never gets too hot, too cold, too wet or dry. And we have 4 distinct seasons, and you go through all sorts of emotions. Early this year we had our summertime in spring. The weather was amazing at the start of lockdown, and then it was a bit wet and chilly for what would be traditionally summer. But now we're into the time when everything is beginning to die back and the leaves are beginning to change, and it's harvest time at the same time. So if you haven't managed to ripen your tomato plants on the tomatoes now, it'll be too late. The dahlias are about to be knocked back and whatever. And there is a certain sadness which comes with the start of this season, the fact that the days are getting shorter, but that soon gives way to work that has to be done and the joys of the leaf changing color, bulbs, some autumn bulbs like Nyrenes coming up at the moment, which look magnificent. And then the hope for next year. So in our heads, we're already thinking 6 months hence, and we're already thinking to prepare for next spring.
And let's face it, regardless of all this crisis, there will be a spring next spring, and we got to keep the optimism up and work towards it. And I think it's dare I say, it's sowing those seeds now to reap it in the autumn. And to that point, Bernard Owens from the Coolerae Staplestown shed had a question: what can I grow from seed at this time of the year, either in a polytunnel or outside?
Paul is our propagating man, but you're absolutely right, Bernard. Seeds are incredible things because they're that sign of hope, aren't they? They can be absolutely tiny. They can be little specks that you can hardly see with the naked eye. A begonia seed is so tiny, it's a little piece of dark dust. And then you've other seeds that are coconuts, they're seeds. and it's nature's way, prime way of propagating. So at this time of the year, Paul, what do you think?
Outside in the veg garden, you're looking at things like broad beans, and it's pretty much the only thing you can actually sow at this time of the year outside, because not many other plants will germinate. But if you've got a polytunnel or even a warm windowsill, you can look at all of the salad crops. Get all of those fast cropping things that crop very, very quickly. That's the type of thing to go looking for. So salads, small green leaves, some of the kohlrabies, that kind of thing. But go for really tough, hardy things. And if you can, get winter varieties of them, just to germinate and be a little bit more hardy, which you need to be aware of, I guess.
But that would mean, Bernard, you'd have to like salad. And who likes salad?
Bernard also asks, when is the right time to grow wildflower from seed?
So you can, in the autumn, I'm going to show you something now. In the autumn, you can, there's 2 times that you can do it. You can do it now, or you can wait till next spring. I would probably be inclined to wait till next spring.
Yeah, chances are, depending on your ground and lots of other things, but you know, not the soil everywhere isn't ideal at the moment. It might be a little bit wet. We've had a lot of rain, so spring is the absolute best time to guarantee result, no matter where you are. And this is what you need to go look out for.
So you can get collections of, these are annual kind of meadow plants. They're not particularly wildflowers, but they do the same, or native wildflowers. They do the same job. And growing wildflowers is so easy. It's just, all it means is stripping away part of your lawn, maybe where most people will be replacing it, and taking out any perennial weeds and sprinkling these seeds in, and then raking that in a little bit, giving it water if it doesn't rain.
Prepare it in the same way you would prepare a lawn. Think about preparing a lawn as if you're going to put grass seed down, and instead of putting the grass seed, put the wildflower seed. I think that's the easiest way to explain it.
And within 6 or 8 weeks, you will have a plot with that one about 20 square meters. But, you know, with a few of those boxes, you'd have a full-size garden, all full of blossom, full of pollinating plants like the poppies and the daisies and cornflower. And they're just so beautiful. And you can do that a few times a year. We sowed one of those boxes in about July or August, and it's still in flower out the front of the house. So you can do it now and let the seed lie there for the winter, and they'll get an early start, or you can wait till spring. For some reason, I think I'd wait till spring.
Yeah, so lots of things will eat seed at the moment, so you're best chance wait till spring.
Wait till spring.
But it couldn't be easier. As an alternative to that, you could just let your lawn grow, or part of your lawn grow, and see what happens. So you can leave an area, a square area, maybe 5 square meters or something like that, and watch those grasses that produce flowers. Lawns we tend to clip before they produce, before the individual plants produce set flower. But if you let them grow, magical things can happen. So it can be very easy, and you can plan on that for next year. If you do it in that area, just cut one grass pathway through, and it looks as if you've planned it and just haven't, you know, let the lawn go.
A specific question from Eamon O'Connor in Ross Trevor mentioned Jersey kale. He has some growing in a pot. For those, Eamon's a prolific walker. He's walked the Camino many times. He walks the Cooley Mountains. If you let Jersey kale grow, I believe, to 6 to 8 feet, it can become a perfect walking staff. But he has it in a pot at about 1 foot high, and he wants to know how to protect it over the winter. You're laughing. You know about this, I think.
We're laughing about this.
I've seen it used like that. I mean, I've even seen Brussels sprouts, even the stalking of Brussels sprouts.
They're very tough.
Yeah, they're tough to use in that way. I'm just very healthy men's sheds, kale and lettuce.
Yeah.
What's happened? What about the spuds, everyone?
Oh, there's spuds growing in Ross Trevor too. I've seen them, and in many sheds around. Absolutely.
This won't be harvesting now. This is spud harvesting.
This is harvesting time. Yeah. What do you think of growing the kale like that?
I think it's totally hardy. All of those kales, brassicas, cabbages, sprouts, they're all totally frost hardy, and I don't think you need to give it any protection at all. I think you can keep it a sunny spot in the garden, but there should be no reason that it would get affected by any heavy frost.
Even though it's native to the Channel Islands, it'll still weather a good winter.
I think it'll take fair bit to get that whacked down. Keep it in the sunny as possible, but I don't think there's any need to protect it. They are quite tough, all of those crops.
And they're also beautiful plants, even to use them ornamentally in the garden. People often don't think about that, but kaolin pots can be absolutely gorgeous. And a long tom terracotta pot is good. And of course, you get different varieties and filled ones. And you need
fantastic.
If you feel you have to.
Kilcockman Shed wants to know, what would you suggest as a method for propagation of clematis? By taking cuttings or sowing seeds?
Cuttings,
yeah, they're tricky. They're very tricky. You can do something with clematis called layering, which might be an easier option, which is taking a bit of the shoot that's growing out and actually pinning it down to the ground. Dermot's going to get a shoot. There's lots of climbers behind us, not clematis, but they're all of the same, climbing kind of style. And it's basically taking a nice, long, fleshy shoot. Dermot's just got a bit of this potato vine, which is perfect for doing that. You take that and you pin it to the ground, the nice flexible stem.
So almost with hairpins.
Yep.
That type, just get a piece of wire, fold it over and pin into the ground and scour the piece of the stem that's going to touch the ground.
Yep.
And that should produce a series, so you can do that multiple times over the length of the clematis, 3 or 4 times. And in time, how long will that take? 6 months?
6 months to a year. It's a slow process, but it's much more guaranteed than a cutting, which can be quite finicky. And you do that, and you basically use an umbilical cord to the mother plant. And after 6 months, a year, you can cut that umbilical cord and dig it up and replant it wherever you want it.
Brilliant, brilliant. Brendan Walsh in Finglas, what would you suggest putting in the raised beds over the winter? That, given the COVID restrictions and you mightn't get to it every day, dare I say, a low maintenance, something that will feed. Broad beans is probably, you mentioned already.
Overwinter is funny.
Yeah.
There's not really an awful lot that's going to produce crops in Ireland outside before May. Yeah. And because all the crops we'd be talking about would be annuals, so they grow, the whole life cycle is in 1 year. There's not a huge amount other than ornamental or planting a herb garden or something like that that would be appropriate.
You can think things like garlics and shallots, you can put them
which
in
would go in now.
But you wouldn't be harvesting them until much later on. Unless you've got an inside space, there's not much harvesting you can do with planting things now, basically, until much later in the early season.
Right. Yeah.
Just on that, if anybody is on Instagram, which is a great way for gardeners to share advice, there is a Cork, down in Cork, there's an urban rooftop farm. So a farm in the middle of the city that was
Brian
set
McCarthy,
up.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And they're a great one to follow because they show propagation methods, they show sowing times, and they're always experimenting with hydroponics, a different way of growing. So they're really fascinating to see what they're doing. And by definition, in an urban setting where there's very few natural resources.
Yeah, and a great inspiration to urban sheds as well. It's up on a roof, isn't it? They're a flat roof. Fantastic.
Yes, it's remarkable what they've done. And I started watching them fairly early because I post these videos. So from about the middle of March, they just decided, right, they lived in a flat overlooking this roof. One of their dads owned the roof. They had a building down below, and they just built this remarkable garden with such intent. And every time you knew the story of the Cork rooftop farm, something else remarkable happened. And they don't do things on small scales, on a small scale, and they're very environmentally conscious. The latest thing was introducing some beehives in there, which are just wonderful to see.
Wow, that's a great inspiration and a path for a lot of urban sheds. On just on raised beds, Paddy Buckley from Macroom, funnily enough, asks, and he'll take himself down to the Cork shed after this, but how do you go about reboosting the soil in a tunnel that has been growing vegetables for over 4 years?
I think you know, really, really important. The basis of all growth, but especially productive growth, is going to be what's in the soil. So really investing in the soil and just borrowing it out and replacing it with fresh material, because it's going to be exhausted after 4 years. So if you...
There's one solution, the other being green manures and actually farmyard manures, those type of soil enrichers. But even that, you will eventually exhaust soil because you're intensively farming it, basically, aren't you, in that kind of setting.
So do you
there's so many options these days, from seaweed manures to leaf mulch, whatever you make yourself. But to understand the basis of everything that grows, soil health is so important. And if you can, to try and garden within that raised bed environment as organically as possible, because chemicals, nitrates that you might be using for feeding, fungicides, whatever, they'll kill off bacteria that are doing very good jobs for you. So garden as naturally as possible and make sure your soil health is good and continually refreshed.
Great. Derek Little from Mive Men's Shed is having trouble with strawberries. He got plants from a friend last autumn, which he planted. They grew fine, except they didn't flower at all this summer. Instead, they just continually shot out runners, which he trimmed. And now he's wondering where next. Is he going to be enjoying strawberries and cream next summer? Please help.
He has to move to Wexford.
That's too easy.
Yeah,
it's a good one. That doesn't happen too often with strawberries. It sounds like they're putting out these runners which strawberries do to propagate themselves. So they're obviously trying their hardest to reproduce, which is what most plants do. Sounds like it might be a little bit deficient in maybe potash or potassium. So if you get high potash feeds, things like bloodfish and bone are great, and an organic solution to that. That kind of feed might just give them a bit of a boost. It sounds like they're lacking something, that they're not producing fruit, because most strawberry plants kind of produce fruit without trying. The other thing that it could be, it might be just that particular variety that you have isn't particularly good. So if you do that and you still don't get a solution to it, maybe buy in 1 or 2 more strawberry plants and start growing them and seeing if it's the actual plant that's the problem rather than the soil or what you're feeding it from the soil. So try 2 different things, I would say there.
And of course, the very obvious thing, and I joke about Wexford, but sun. You know, the optimum part of the garden or whatever. That's what strawberries really need. A huge amount of sunshine.
Great, brilliant. Okay, a question from John Kivlahan from the appropriately named Mojo Men's Shed. When can you cut back a fuchsia bush? When is the best time to go at the fuchsia bush?
It depends on why you want to cut it back. Most of those hardwood shrubs, I would say, trimming after flowering. Is it that it's just got too much? When lockdown ended, I got down to Ballyskelligs in County Kerry this year. And again, because I was at home this year, we have friends who live down there, but I never get down in midsummer. So I've never seen it in its full glory. The hundreds of miles of fuchsia that were growing there with the Montbretia growing underneath them, the red and the orange, were looking absolutely brilliant with no intervention. So you don't need to cut them back. However, if you want to cut them back to reshape it, although you shouldn't be reshaping with a fuchsia, do it after flowering, because if you do it later in the year, you'll lose the flower for the following year.
But you probably won't, because fuchsias are tough as old boots. They are one of these plants that you can literally run over with a lawnmower and they'll come back from the dead. So don't worry too much.
Not to be advised. Sean O'Reilly from Clay Men's Shed wants to know, what about planting tulip bulbs amongst the potted plants? And I assume he's talking about doing that now. And get the tulips in the ground now. Is that advisable? Absolutely.
Now is the perfect time to put them in the ground. We do every evening. We do an Instagram live broadcast, and was it last week? We did
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. We did lasagna planting of bulbs. So we get one pot. We put different layers of bulbs. So generally something like alliums, would be the deepest, then tulips, then daffodils, then some of the smaller crocus or snowdrops, and to use them in conjunction with shrubs or other flowering perennials, absolutely perfect. The thing you have to remember is that tulips are one of those bulbs that generally will only last 1 year. Don't replant them in an area that you've had tulips previously, because there is this kind of replant disease that can affect them, and plant them twice the depth of the bulb. It doesn't really matter. It's very obvious what way the top is, but they'll always find their way up towards the surface. And again, good quality compost for whatever you have in those pots, along with the tulips, to give them the best plant, the best potential of producing good flower. I'll just show you what tulip bulbs look like.
Yeah, bulbs are great. They just keep coming and coming, and you can put them pretty much anywhere, under shrubs and pots, lots of different places. There you go.
So that's what they look like at the moment, and twice the depth of the bulb, 2 to 3 times the depth of the bulb. But they'll find their way out. That's the bottom of it there, and the top is that kind of peaked top of the onion area.
John O'Doherty is having some problems, and he wants to know, I think before he unleashes an arsenal of weapons of mass destruction, do slugs and snails have any discernible function in the ecosystem?
Yes, they do, and everything has. Everything that's out there in the garden has. So they will, an awful lot of plants in our garden are annuals or perennials, and both of those types of plants will produce growth that comes up out of the ground, gets bigger, and then go back down into the ground. So one of the jobs of the slug is to be a feed for other creatures. So hedgehogs, I have chickens in the garden now. The chickens love going in search for a slug, and birds. So they produce food for other creatures, but also they will aid the composting, the natural composting ecosystem of our garden life, and therefore enhancing the soil, because they'll break down the foliage, and whenever they poo, that will go into the ground. So it's all about breaking down. We tend to feel as gardeners that we're the only ones that should benefit. Our nice things like butterflies or whatever should also be allowed in gardens, and robins. But actually gardens should be open to everything. A lot of people get obsessed when they grow hostas, that they want perfect leaves and whatever. So I always think we've gone into this kind of 1950s idea of perfection. It doesn't exist. And the more we relax about it, the less intervention we'll have. Our gardens will be a lot more untidy. Our productive gardens, i.e. the fruit and the vegetables, not everything will come to us. Some of the creatures out there will have their feed first, but that's the way I think we should live with nature, rather than demand bigger, better, whatever. It's good looking for things that are tastier, but also for more natural, I think, would be the way. Do you have any?
Yeah, well, it's great that you even asked that question. So you're considering it before you go out and do whatever you do to them. But everything does have a place in an ecosystem. And yeah, slugs and snails are important for breaking down things. The thing that if you have a dog that goes out on the lawn overnight, if there's slugs, they will actually break that down, and they will really aid that, as well as lots of other things. So slugs and snails do perform a function in the garden system for lots of different things.
To that point, Dr. James Harley in Port Stewart has asked about his Brussels sprouts are being eaten by caterpillars. How does he prevent that in time for Christmas, I suppose? Caterpillar, again, you'd say let them eat. There's plenty for
well, I mean, it's a balance, isn't it? You have to be very...
You'd be very hungry if you were letting them eat everything. Caterpillars you're actually a little bit late. So the caterpillars come with the cabbage white butterfly, which comes usually at the end of summer. And the way to stop them getting too badly into the plants is some sort of netting over the cabbage plants. On a big industrial scale, it isn't as much of a problem because there's just so many of them. But on a small, garden scale, a couple of plants can get decimated. They eat things like nasturtiums as well. My nasturtiums this year got totally whacked by these cabbage white butterflies. So a net over them at the right time might be a little late now, but it still might be worth a net over them in case there are the odd butterfly out, because the butterfly hatches the caterpillar, which does all of the damage.
Great.
And if you're not sure about Brussels sprouts for your Christmas dinner, try stir fry them. They're absolutely delicious.
Okay. It's delicious. It's a cooking show as well as a gardening show. We cover everything.
I did that for Christmas on Come Dine With Me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because I don't like. Well, I wanted to do a traditional Christmas lunch, but I don't like Brussels sprouts that much. But stir fry, they were delicious.
Okay, that's on the list. The same John O'Doherty actually has several plum trees in his garden, but they haven't produced any fruit in 3 years. But he's suffering from plum jealousy because his neighbours' plum trees are. Any advice there? Is it like the strawberries, do you think, or is it a more complex plum problem?
It depends on how old they are and what their history is. It's unusual. I assume they're mature. It's unusual for a plum tree not to go through 3 years of kind of. Often you'll get 1 year where the crop is absolutely fantastic, but the next year there's very little on it. The past 3 years we've had every sort of weather, so it won't really be that. It's certainly feeding.
Only thing it might be if you're pruning it at the wrong time of the year. So plum trees actually need to be pruned in the summertime, not when they're dormant in the winter, like a lot of fruit trees. And that can lead to things like silverleaf, a bacterial disease, which can really weaken the plant. And that might be some of the reasons. So look at when you're pruning it. But I've actually came to the conclusion that after a while, it's just not worth it. And I'm taking out 2 plum trees this winter. So it might be worth starting afresh and having one to outcompete the neighbour, because there's nothing worse than looking over at the neighbours and seeing them table up more on their trees.
Yeah.
Think about starting afresh with maybe a smaller one, and maybe thinking about changing your pruning if you're pruning it at that time.
The other thing would be to ask the neighbour what they're doing and what their way of looking after the trees, if they prune, when they prune, what they feed, all of that type of.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, it would be a high potassium feed, much like the strawberries.
That's good advice. Stephen Gartlin from Leekslip asks, how would you transplant a climbing rose? Been in the ground for a long time, but it needs moving.
It's going to be a challenge. It's really going to be a challenge, and it mightn't. Well, the thing is, if it needs moving anyway, you've nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So it's just digging, taking as much of the, first of all, pruning back, so that you're not taking a huge amount of foliage. The foliage is going to be useless. It's all going to die away anyway. Prune it back. Wait until things are absolutely dormant, another kind of 5 or 6 weeks, I suppose, and digging as much as that root. You find there's one big tap root, and then
sometimes an old mature one mightn't have a whole lot of side kind of fibrous roots on it. So don't be too worried, even if all you have is one big, really woody root. Quite often they come back from them. So it is worth digging it up and replanting it. Make sure when you replant it, you don't put it somewhere there's already a rose, because roses hate growing where other ones have grown in the past. They just will not do. One of these weird things about gardening, just roses won't grow where a rose has already grown. And when you're planting it, make sure to bury that ground as deep and that root as deep as possible. Plant roses really, really deep. Bury them nearly down to the stems, and they will root, hopefully, on the fresh growth as much as the old.
And it may be, I don't know what the situation is there, but it may be it might be a good idea to pot it up for a year and to put it in a polytunnel and really look after it that way, because you have a less than 50-50 chance, I'd say, for an established climbing rose like that. Roses are quite difficult to move after the first couple of years anyway, but maybe putting it in a greenhouse or a polytunnel and looking after it very carefully for its first year.
And if you have time, try to take some cuttings of it, because it's a good time to take hardwood cuttings.
That's a very good idea.
The length of a pencil, stick them in the ground and give them a go. Maybe do a dozen of them. You might get one, but that's all you need. So give that a try as well as kind of insurance policy.
Excellent, excellent. One more question. I have an apple tree that has grown from seed from my daughter brought home from the creche. And this is a personal question, and it's now 8 years old, and I have it in a pot. Is it time to put it in the ground? It's grown. It's about 4 or 5 foot high. It's the riskiest thing I'm ever going to transplant. So I want the best advice if I can.
Would you move it? Are you too afraid to give the?
No,
It's probably time.
It's definitely time to put it in the ground. What sort of shape is it? Has it grown into?
It's grown out and it's grown up.
Yeah.
It's about 5 foot. It's in a pot about 2 foot wide, 1.5 foot high. There's a bit of mildew. I know. I treat that with soapy water. Am I right? Detergent.
Yeah. I first of all, planting in the dormant season is the most important thing because it'll be less risk planting it, from now on into November, December, than if it's actively growing and losing water through foliage or whatever. So I don't see. I mean, if you've been able to keep it going all this time in a pot from a plant grown from seed, that's brilliant. But it should be easier to keep going.
You shouldn't kill it replanting it. Replanting something is not usually how you kill a plant. You usually kill it by neglecting it from underwatering or overwatering. But if you kept it late, right.
Now, if you had tried to replant it or to plant it in the ground in June or July, that might be a different problem. And there'd be so many things looking to attack it at that time of the year. But starting it off in the winter, prepare the ground well, make sure it's the soil is nice and fertile. Water it just once in to settle, to take any airlocks out of the planting hole, but it should be fine.
Brilliant. Okay. Gentlemen, one more, sorry, I'll press you. How do I remove a large sycamore root from James Fletcher? I think he's planning.
It's a challenge. Sycamore, they self-seed very, very easy, and it's just digging.
Or get a stump grinder because they're good fun. If you can, it's not.
Yeah, if it's big, yes, get a stump grinder. One thing to remember is, I was just talking to Paul about it in my garden. I took down a willow tree, not a huge willow tree, but the stump was about that thick. I took it down. Was it just last year? Oh, you took it down.
This time last year.
Yeah. Oh, I took the foliage off, and you took the trunk down. And I wasn't going to be able to get a stump grinder in. So I'm just going to continually take off the foliage, and the plant won't survive if it can't produce energy, if it can't photosynthesize. So it'll be every few weeks out there taking any leaves that grow out, and eventually it'll rot away. So if you can't get the stump grinder in and it continues to grow up, just clip any new growth as soon as you see it appear, and it'll eventually give up the battle.
And be thankful it's not an ash tree because they're twice the deeper root as a sycamore. They're actually not the deepest rooting plant, so you're not doing too bad straight away. So
okay. Diarmuid, Paul, I can't thank you enough. It's been brilliant and inspirational. And if you don't mind, we'll share the video because there'll be a lot of use of what you've given us today. And we really appreciate your valuable time. If there's ever anything the Men's Sheds of Ireland can do for you guys, if you need anything built or made, or you need a hand, please let us know, get in touch. And we look forward to possibly talking to you again. And thanks very much indeed.
No problem. We're delighted. And every evening, we're between 7 and 8, we're on Instagram on @Diarmuid Gavin. Our Paul's account is @Paul T. Smith. You can send questions there, but we have a bit of crack. We talk gardening, and there's a community of people who love whether it's design, whether it's gardening, from all around the world who join us. So we'd be delighted to see some of you there.
We'll share that with everyone. Gentlemen,
Right.
okay. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye. Bye.